Ladies and gentlemen, it has become a national obsession of sorts to look at the general election results and second guess their impact on the Nifty, as if the general election results set the tone for the Nifty for many, many years to come. But guess what? In reality, history shows us that while the general election results can cause the Nifty to swing very, very wildly in both directions, and often these swings can run counter to what is happening in global equity markets, such swings hardly ever last beyond a couple of weeks. And post that, the Nifty very, very quickly reverts back to trending in accordance with the global macroeconomic situation. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very important to get rid of this election-centric obsession about the Nifty and not lose sight about the larger global macroeconomic situation, because that is what is ultimately going to determine which way the Nifty is headed once this initial euphoria related to the election results starts to wane. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I cannot start this video without thanking each and every one of you for the kind of love and support that all of you have continued to show for the content that I have been producing. This particular video of mine, which happens to be my most recent video, has so far managed to get more than 38,000 views over the last 2 weeks since I published this video. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for this overwhelming show of support to my content. But ladies and gentlemen, if you do like my content, then I have a request for you. Please do consider subscribing to my channel. That's not going to cost you anything, but that's going to be immensely helpful in improving the reach of the content that I produce. Now, coming to what I want to discuss in this particular video. Ladies and gentlemen, as I record this video in the second half of 1st of June, the seventh and the final phase of polling for the ongoing 2024 general elections are underway. And chances are that by the time I'm able to finish the editing and publication of this particular video later in the day, polling would have closed for these general elections and the exit poll results would be out. And at this stage, the most important question prevailing in the mind of every investor in India is how this country has voted and what is the likely implication of general election results on the Nifty when the official results are released on 4th of June 2024. And in this backdrop, ladies and gentlemen, I thought it might be useful to go back and look at how the Nifty has behaved historically in the run-up to general elections and in the immediate aftermath of general election result announcement. So let's first look at the most recent example, which is the 2019 general elections, the results of which were released on 23rd of May 2019. So how is it that the Nifty behaved in the run-up to the 2019 general elections and in the immediate aftermath of the release of the official results? So this is how the Nifty moved from April 2019 onwards. So in the run-up to the 2019 general election, the Nifty made a new all-time high of 11,787 points on 16th of April 2019. But after making this new all-time high, as you can see, the Nifty experienced a fairly steep 5.5% correction over the next one month. Why did we get this correction? We got this correction because at that point in time, the US and China were in the middle of an escalating trade war because the then US President Donald Trump was threatening to increase the scope and scale of American tariffs on Chinese imports. And global equity markets started to become very, very jittery at the prospects of this trade war, intensifying even further. And as a result, there was a very nasty correction that kicked in markets around the world from middle of April onwards. But as you can see, in case of India, the Nifty bottomed very, very abruptly on 13th of May 2019. And in fact, after 13th of May, the Nifty started to rebound very, very steeply. So as of 13th of May 2019, of course, India was in the middle of the 2019 general elections, and the Nifty at that point in time was pricing in a re-election for Mr. Modi. And indeed, the results came in line with what the markets were pricing in. In fact, Mr. Modi came back with an even stronger mandate than what he had got in 2014. And as a result, the Nifty responded euphorically, and we got a 8.5% rally from 13th of May 2019 onwards, and the Nifty went on to make a new all-time high of 12,089 points by 3rd of June 2019. Mind you, As a result of this 8.5% rally, at that point in time, the Nifty became the only outlier market in the world which was experiencing a rally while rest of the world was correcting because of the trade war situation between US and China. So, ladies and gentlemen, while it's exceptional that Nifty managed to rally by 8.5% back in 2019 at a time when the rest of the world was correcting very, very sharply, it's also worth noting that this exception rally that was underway in India was to last for only 3 weeks between 13th of May 2019 and 3rd of June 2019. And as you can see, once this initial euphoria around the general election results started to wane after 3rd June 2019, the Nifty also once again started to trend downwards and join rest of the world in the correction that was already underway in rest of the world. And as you can see, after 3rd June 2019, the Nifty went on to give up all its gains that were accrued in the immediate aftermath of the 2019 general election results, and the Nifty actually witnessed a correction of almost 11.5% between 3rd June 2019 and 19th September 2019. Why did we get such a steep correction? We got such a steep correction because of two reasons. Firstly, the trade war situation continued to worsen between June and September. Secondly, and more importantly, we got a very severe liquidity crisis in the US banking system from July 2019 onwards. We want to know more about how and why this liquidity crisis unfolded in the US banking system. Well, I've done a dedicated video on that, which I had published back in 14th of April 2024. By the way, this particular video has so far been viewed more than 1.5 lakh times. So I encourage all of you to go and have a look at this video. I'm going to leave a link to this video in the description section of this particular video. But coming back to the 2019 general election results and the lessons it has for us right now in 2024, I think the message is quite clear. If the election results after 4th June 2024 are in line with what the markets are pricing in, and markets are quite clearly pricing in right now Mr. Modi's re-election, then we could well get a very, very euphoric rally from here. And at the same time, if the election results are not in line with what the markets are pricing in, we could get a nasty downjerk as well. But the 2019 experience also tells us, ladies and gentlemen, that whichever way the Nifty swings from here, any wild swing from here is not really likely to last for a very, very long time. And sooner rather than later, in fact, within a matter of few weeks, the Nifty is most likely going to revert back to trend in line with what is broadly happening in global equity markets. So what exactly is the most important macroeconomic theme in the world right now? Well, for that, I'm going to borrow very heavily from this last video of mine in which I discussed how the most important macroeconomic theme in the world right now is an US economy which is slowing down very, very rapidly. And we saw very strong evidence of a US economy that is slowing down at a very rapid pace by way of an absolute carnage in top US tech stocks right through last week. Especially on Thursday last week, we had a blue chip tech stock like Salesforce correct by as much as 20% in a single session. Other leading tech names such as Nvidia and Microsoft also corrected by upwards of 3% in a single session. But why is it that these top tech names are correcting so sharply? Well, in case of Salesforce, the correction came primarily on the back of the company missing its earning projections for the first quarter of 2024, and more importantly, because the company provided very bleak outlook for demand conditions for its products and services in the year ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, companies after companies are making it amply clear that there's a very strong demand slowdown kicking in for their goods and services. And historically, whenever that has happened, that has historically meant that the Fed is ultimately forced to react and start to cut interest rates, or the Fed funds rate as it is technically called in the US, sooner rather than later. So what are the implications, especially for the stock market, once the Fed starts to cut Fed funds rate? Well, once the Fed starts to cut Fed funds rate, at least initially, stock markets take that as a very bullish signal, because stock markets tend to believe that once the Fed starts to cut Fed funds rate, that would translate into lower cost of capital for consumers and businesses. And as a result, historically, we have seen whenever the Fed has started to cut Fed funds rate, that usually leads to an acceleration in the ongoing stock market rally. So if you look at what happened in the last two business cycles, you would notice that the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate for the first time in this century from September 2007 onwards. And as soon as the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate, that led to an acceleration in the ongoing rally. And the Nifty here in India rallied by a staggering 45% over the next 4 months, starting September of 2007. The same thing happened once again from August 2019 onwards, which is when the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate for the second time in this century. And as soon as the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate from August 2019 onwards, that kickstarted a rally in the Nifty that went on for next 5 months. And during these 5 months, the Nifty rallied by 13%. But rate cuts being bullish for stocks is a completely wrong interpretation. Because the real reason why the Fed has to start rate cuts is not really because the Fed wants to support equity markets. But the real reason why the Fed has to start cutting Fed funds rate is because by that time the economy is in such a weak spot and the demand slowdown is in such a severe state that the Fed literally has no other option left but to start rate cuts, in the hope that hopefully the rate cuts would be able to salvage the economy and prevent the economy from slipping into a recession. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen, the Fed has never really been successful in doing this, because historically we have seen that whenever the Fed has started to cut rates, the US economy has slipped into a recession within a matter of months anyways, despite the Fed starting to cut Fed funds rate. And once the US economy slips into a recession, that's when stock market participants realize that there is absolutely no justification for lofty stock market valuations. And that's when a nasty stock market correction kicks in, first in the US, but very soon the stock market correction that starts in the US spreads to almost every leading stock market around the world, including here in India. Once again, this is something that has been witnessed in the last two business cycles. We saw this after September of 2007, which is when the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate for the first time in this century. And that paved the way for the next recession, which started from January of 2008. And as soon as we had a recession starting in the US from January 2008 onwards, we got a huge stock market correction, not just in the US, but here in India as well. We witnessed a nasty 60% correction in the Nifty. The same thing was repeated after August of 2019, which is when the Fed started to cut Fed funds rate for the second time in this century. And that paved the way for a recession to start in the US in the next 5 months. And as soon as the recession started in the US from January of 2020 onwards, we got a nasty 38% correction here in the Nifty. What does all this mean for the Nifty? What is the cumulative impact likely to be of a favorable general election result here in India and the impact of an impending recession in the US? Well, if I have to summarize the impact of all this on the Nifty, I think this is how things are likely to play out for the Nifty over the next couple of months. If indeed the official results confirm that Mr. Modi is going to be voted back to office for the third time, that would almost certainly kickstart an euphoric rally in the Nifty over the next couple of weeks. But just like in 2019, I don't think this rally can continue for a very long time, especially if we continue to get bad news coming from the US related to a demand slowdown there. And that's when I think the post-election rally in the Nifty is likely to take a pause. But a continued slowdown in US demand is ultimately going to force the Fed to start cutting Fed funds rate. Now, it's very difficult to put a timeline on when the Fed will start to cut Fed funds rate, but if I must hazard a guess, my sense at this stage is that the Fed will be forced to start rate cuts by no later than September of this year. And as and when the Fed starts to cut Fed funds rates, history shows us that equity markets tend to take that as a very bullish signal for stocks, and that then kickstarts the last leg of the rally, both in the US as well as in India. And this last leg of the equity market rally usually continues all the way till the onset of a recession in the US. And once we get an onset of the recession in the US, that eventually paves the way for a very large stock market correction, first in the US, and then a US stock market correction typically spreads to almost every equity market around the world, including here in India. So to summarize once again, we get a strong euphoric rally in the Nifty if and when we get official confirmation that Mr. Modi has been voted back to power for the third time. This rally lasts for a couple of weeks and then takes a pause. Ultimately, the Fed is forced to start cutting Fed funds rate. And once the Fed starts to cut Fed funds rate, that kickstarts the last leg of the rally, both in the US as well as in India. And this last leg of the rally is likely to play out all the way till the onset of a recession in the US. And once we get an onset of the recession in the US, we get a very large stock market correction, first in the US, and then this stock market correction in the US spreads to almost every equity market around the world, including here in India. And that's how this current ongoing business cycle comes to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the end of this video. But before I conclude, I'm going to give you a glimpse of what I'm going to take up in my next video. The most common rebuttal I get to my thesis is that it's almost entirely based on the premise that as and when the US economy slips into the next recession, that will lead to a large stock market correction initially in the US, and that in turn will trigger a large stock market correction here in India. And a lot of investors and analysts in India now believe that while that might have been true in the past, it's unlikely to be true going forward, especially because of the strong domestic flows that we are witnessing, especially from our SIP investors. SIP flows, by the way, has gone past the mark of 20,000 crores per month. Ladies and gentlemen, our strong domestic flows are something that all of us need to be proud of. But to believe that our domestic flows are now so large and so strong, they effectively decouple our markets and economy from what's happening around the world, to the extent that even when we get a recession in the US, that will not have any spillover effects for our markets and our economy. Well, to my mind, that is nothing but misplaced arrogance. And that's why this is something that I'm going to take up in my next video and explain why I disagree with any such notion that our economy and our markets are now completely decoupled from what's happening in the US because of our strong domestic flows. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, I'll conclude this video. I sincerely hope that you liked what I presented during the course of this video. If you did, that I would once again appeal to all of you to consider subscribing to my channel. Once again, a big thanks to all of you for all the love and support that you have extended to all the content that I have produced over the last couple of weeks and months. Thank you very much.